You strip away the authority, now all of a sudden they go, wait a minute. If we don't have to believe in the Pope anymore and the papacy and the authority of the church, what else can we deal with? Oh, hey, guess what? I kind of want to get married. So guess what Martin Luther did? He got married. All these nuns getting married to all these priests that were running away. I mean, it just turned into mayhem, and it continues.
After the Protestant Reformation, Christianity didn't just split over one issue. Authority itself changed. For over 1,500 years, Christians looked to the church to help interpret difficult teachings of Jesus, even the hard ones about marriage, divorce, and sexual morality. Then suddenly Christians were asking a new question. If the church can be wrong here, what else can it be wrong about? Now let's slow down and be fair for a second. Some Catholics say Martin Luther rejected the Pope, then priests started marrying, nuns left convents, and everything turned into chaos. There is some truth to what they mean, but we should clarify it. The issue is not simply that people started getting married. Catholics actually believe marriage is a beautiful sacrament. The deeper issue was authority. When Jesus said in Matthew 19, "What God has joined together, let no man separate," the church treated that teaching seriously for centuries. But after the Reformation, different groups began interpreting marriage, divorce, remarriage, and annulments differently. Over time, Christianity became divided, not only on salvation and authority, but also on what Jesus actually meant about marriage. So the real question is not, did Protestants ruin marriage? That's too simplistic. The real question is, did removing church authority eventually make Christian teaching on marriage more flexible than Jesus intended? And today, we're going to talk about why Catholics still hold one of the hardest teachings in Christianity. Marriage is sacred, divorce may happen civilly. But what did Jesus actually say about remarriage?
Despite the popular misconception, divorce is not always a sin in the Catholic Church and can even be recommended at times. How is this the case? First, let's start with marriage itself, which for Catholics is unbreakable. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus teaches that no human should ever separate what God has brought together through a covenant. For this reason, we believe that dissolving a marriage is impossible. This is different, however, from a civil marriage and divorce, which is more of a social contract. Because it can cause harm to children, break up the family structure, and even be a scandal society, civil divorce is always seen as a grave matter to be avoided at all costs. But that doesn't mean that both parties are equally at fault when it happens. One spouse may have been faithful and tried to work through difficulties, while the other was abusive or abandoned the marriage. The faithful party is not at fault and may even be encouraged for their own safety or well-being to live separately. When this is the case, remarriage is not possible because the marriage before God still exists, but being civilly divorced is not sinful in itself, nor does it remove someone from full life in the church.
The Catholic Church declared my first marriage never existed. Let me explain. I was granted an annulment, officially called a declaration of nullity, which means that the church looked back at that wedding day and determined that a valid sacramental marriage never actually came into existence. In other words, it means that something essential was missing from the very beginning. So what has to be present for a marriage to be valid? At the moment of consent, both people must be free to marry, must freely and fully intend what the church defines as marriage: permanence, fidelity, and openness to children. Catholics must also marry in proper form, meaning before a priest or deacon and 2 witnesses, unless they receive permission otherwise. If any of that is missing at the time of the vows, the marriage may be invalid from the start. Now, in my case, my first marriage did not take place in the Catholic Church, and there was no dispensation, or I wasn't given permission to marry outside of the church. That's called a lack of canonical form. It's one of the clearest grounds for nullity, which is why my case was relatively quickly and easy. So how does an annulment work? The first step is calling your parish and saying, "I'm divorced and I want to understand the annulment process." From there, your case is sent to the diocesan tribunal, which is simply the church's official court that prayerfully examines whether a valid sacramental marriage ever existed from the beginning. You'll share your story and the history of the relationship, and witnesses may also be asked to speak to what things were like before and during the marriage. The other party is normally notified and invited to participate, and then a judge or panel of judges reviews everything presented and makes a decision. Most cases take 1 to 2 years. Simpler cases, like lack of canonical form, are often much faster. No one can be denied because of inability to pay. So, that myth, not true. So why does this process exist at all? Because marriage is a sacrament and it reflects Christ's unbreakable love for his church. The tribunal exists to protect the sacrament and offer clarity and healing to those who've experienced broken relationships. If you're divorced and wondering whether this is for you, just call your parish. You don't need to have all of the answers in order to take that step because the church is not trying to shame you. She wants to walk with you.
In Catholicism, marriage is not just paperwork, romance, or two people deciding to build a life together because they are in love. Marriage is a sacrament, which means Catholics believe God is actively involved in it. A Catholic marriage is a sacred covenant before God where a husband and wife give themselves fully to one another. And here is the part many people misunderstand. Catholic marriage is not primarily about happiness. It is about holiness. That sounds strange in a world where people constantly say marriage exists to make us happy. But the Catholic Church teaches something much deeper. Marriage exists to help make us holy. Or put another way, marriage is supposed to help get you to heaven. Catholics believe one of the biggest purposes of marriage is helping one another become saints.
If your paradigm has never been set this way, I hope you understand that what the scriptures are telling us is that as bride and bridegroom, your marriage and your intimacy are two parts of the same reality that makes you a saint. Have any of you been told that before? Really? Wow, because this is in the Catechism. And as a convert coming into the Catholic Church, I didn't know this, and then I discovered it and I went, wow. As a Protestant, we were told marriage was simply for friendship and companionship. And then we were told that intimacy was simply for the purpose of...
Sees your flaws more than your spouse. Who teaches you patience, forgiveness, sacrifice, humility, and selflessness more than anyone else? Usually your spouse. Catholic marriage is not just about romance and date nights. It is about becoming more like Christ through sacrifice and love. Your spouse is not simply your romantic partner. They are your partner in salvation. This is why Catholic marriage vows are taken so seriously. When Catholics stand before God, they promise to remain faithful in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, until death. Why? Because Catholics believe marriage reflects Christ's love for his church, and Jesus does not walk away when things become difficult. Now, before someone says, so Catholics expect people to stay miserable forever, let's slow down and be fair. The church is not teaching that people should stay in dangerous, abusive, or destructive situations. But before we talk about divorce, we have to talk about Jesus, because ultimately, this is not about Catholic rules. It is about what Christ himself taught. When Jesus was asked about divorce in Matthew 19, his response shocked people. They asked him if divorce was lawful, and Jesus answered, "What therefore God has joined together, let no man separate." Then he says something even harder. Whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery. Now let's be honest, those are difficult words. In fact, Jesus' own disciples basically respond by saying, if that's true, maybe marriage isn't worth it. That actually happens in Scripture because Jesus raised the standard. He did not lower it. And this is where the Catholic Church says something many Christians today struggle with. We cannot ignore what Jesus plainly taught simply because culture changed. The Church believes Jesus meant what he said about marriage. So here comes the obvious question. Can Catholics divorce? The answer surprises many people. Civilly? Yes. Sacramentally? It becomes more complicated. This is where people often misunderstand Catholic teaching. The Church recognizes that marriages sometimes become deeply broken. Sometimes there is abuse, infidelity, addiction, abandonment, manipulation, or severe emotional harm. The Catholic Church does not tell someone, stay and be abused. That is simply not true. A separation may become necessary. A civil divorce may even be needed for legal protection, finances, or the safety of children. The Church understands real life and difficult situations. But here is where Catholic teaching remains firm. Just because a marriage ends civilly does not automatically mean the sacramental marriage ended in God's eyes. Why? Because Catholics believe Jesus taught that marriage is permanent. And this brings us to one of the biggest misunderstandings about Catholicism. Annulments. Many people say an annulment is just Catholic divorce. Not exactly. An annulment is not saying, well, you were married and now you aren't. Instead, the church asks a different question. Was there a valid sacramental marriage to begin with? That is a huge difference. For example, if someone entered marriage without real consent, hid major issues, never intended lifelong faithfulness, rejected openness to children, or lacked the maturity to truly understand marriage, the church investigates whether a valid sacramental marriage actually happened. Think of it this way: a marriage ceremony happened, a legal marriage license happened, but the church asks, was a true covenant before God actually formed? That is why annulments take time. The church takes marriage seriously because Catholics believe marriage matters deeply to God. Now let's talk about something modern culture often gets completely backwards: the benefits of Catholic marriage. We live in a world terrified of commitment. People delay marriage, avoid marriage, or treat it like a temporary agreement that lasts only while feelings stay strong. But Catholics believe God designed marriage for stability, growth, and holiness. A strong Catholic marriage creates something beautiful. It creates stability for children, accountability between spouses, faith-centered homes, forgiveness during difficult seasons, and a place where sacrifice becomes normal. Catholics often call the family the domestic church. That means the home becomes a small place of faith where families pray together, worship together, raise children together, and help one another grow closer to Christ. Marriage in Catholicism is not just building a life together, it is helping one another become holy. Some days marriage feels joyful, other days marriage feels hard, very hard. But Catholicism teaches that love is not merely a feeling. Love is sacrifice. Love is commitment. Love is choosing someone again and again, even when life becomes difficult. Because feelings change, but covenant remains. Now let's address one of the biggest criticisms Catholics hear. Catholics are too strict about divorce. But here is the uncomfortable question. Or are many modern Christians simply more flexible than Jesus was? That is the real conversation. Because if we are honest, Jesus sounded incredibly serious about marriage. The Catholic Church simply refuses to water that down. Not because the Church hates people, not because the Church ignores suffering, not because the Church wants people trapped, but because Catholics believe truth and compassion belong together. The Church believes marriage matters because Jesus said it matters. Now maybe someone watching this is divorced. Maybe your marriage ended. Maybe you carry pain, regret, confusion, or guilt. Hear this clearly. The Church does not hate you. You are not forgotten. You are not damaged beyond God's mercy. Priests walk with divorced Catholics every day. The Church helps people navigate these situations all the time. God's mercy has not disappeared from your life. Because marriage is not just about romance, it is about sacrifice, faithfulness, family, holiness, and ultimately helping one another become saints.